You sometimes see this message when you watch TV. This morning, it is needed for the sermon. Now that I have all of your attention, the Bible has some stories of sexual intrigue and cultural customs that are very strange to us. Genesis 38 contains one of them. It's also strange because Joseph is not the main character as he is in chapters 37 to 50, which we did a series on this last summer, and left out chapter 38. But it fits. The theme of the Joseph story is that God's presence is with Joseph, a slave in a foreign country. And why does God's presence matter? Because God wants to save the family of Joseph. Why is God interested in Joseph's family? Because God has chosen this family through whom all nations will be blessed. If you look back at Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 3, you have that promise. Thus, God's universal blessing of shalom, of peace and harmony and goodwill is dependent on the continuation of this family line. And this is the connection to Genesis chapter 38 and Tamar, even though Joseph isn't the main character. Tamar is often left out, and that's why I love that second verse. It's very odd that we would actually, I looked in the scripture index in our hymn book, and Tamar is actually in a song. And so I'm glad we could sing that today along with other women. There is a line of women who took on powerful men, defying laws and scruples to let life live again. And though despite their triumph, their stories stay untold. And that would be true for Tamar. And hopefully after today, we can hear that story. Our world is very different from the ancient world described in the Bible, as Char already mentioned. It's difficult for us to even imagine this world. It was a patriarchal society. It was the world of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and the wives barely get a mention. Women were the property of men in a patriarchal society. Abraham lied about his wife Sarah and gave her to the Pharaoh as a sexual partner for his own safety. The primary purpose of women in that time was to bear male children to carry on the family name. When they were unable to do that, the men brought in alternative vessels. Thus, Abraham brought in the sex slave, Hagar, because Sarah was not giving him a son. Isaac sent a servant to get an in-house wife for him so the bloodline would remain pure. Jacob had 4 sexual partners who bore him children. These are the nasty details of a patriarchal society out of which comes our Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. But a bit of Canadian history trivia to demonstrate that perhaps we are not that far removed. Women were not considered persons in Canada until 1929. No matter how progressive we think of ourselves, we still live in a patriarchal society. Of the 27 churches in our denomination in British Columbia, do you know how many lead pastors are women? It's a rhetorical question. To help us not to become too arrogant, We still live in a patriarchal society. But let's return to the background of Genesis 38 to help us to understand this strange story. In a patriarchal culture, eldest sons are at the top of the value hierarchy. Behind the plot of the story in Genesis 38, there is an important levirate law that states, if you want to look it up, Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 and 6, that if an elder son dies without a male heir, his younger brother is to marry or have sex with his widow to carry on the name of the eldest son. Now, this may be objectionable to us. Well, it probably is. But this was the law in a patriarchal culture. And it's the key to our understanding of this story in Genesis 38. So let's get to that story again with some explanations as we go through it. Now, first of all, it's odd that the male lead in this story, in this present episode, is Judah, who's the fourth son of Jacob, not the oldest. There's nothing special about the fourth, but I'll leave that bit of trivia alone. Suffice it to say that Judah has abandoned the practice of his grandfather Isaac to choose a wife from among his own people. He moves away from his family and marries a local girl who is a Canaanite. And we don't even know her name. We just know her father's name, Shua. Well, she bears Judah 3 sons. All good so far. Judah got a wife named Tamar for his eldest son, In the first of Yahweh's 2 appearances, Yahweh kills for an unspecified wickedness. So he dies then without a male heir. And then that law kicks in. So Judah asks his second son, Onan, to have sexual intercourse with Tamar to produce an heir for the eldest. There doesn't seem to be any consideration for Tamar. She has no choice in the matter. It is all about getting a male heir. And then a patriarchal culture, a woman's well-being is dependent on her relationship to a male. If we continue in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 7 to 10, we note that the law does give the woman the right to complain if the younger brother refuses, because her dignity is attached to that law, or attached to a male. The second son, Onan, agrees to marry her, but then gets around the law by practicing what we would call premature withdrawal to prevent impregnation. For this specified wickedness, this time, of refusing to honor his older brother, Yahweh kills Onan as well. And if you'll note, that is the end of any mention of Yahweh, God of Israel, in the story, or at least directly. Legally, according to this law, Judah is now obligated to order his third son to fulfill the responsibilities of the law. But the third son is still underage. And Judah is worried, and understandably, since he lost his first 2 sons, he's kind of hesitant to give his third. So out of concern for himself, Judah deprives Tamar of the one chance she had of fulfilling her role and sends her back to her father, a childless widow. By the way, that's the origin of the tradition of the father giving away the bride to the new husband. It comes from this law because the property is changed from the father to the husband who now owns the wife. So you may want to think again if you're thinking about that at your wedding. Anyway, I'm not telling you what to do. Just know where it comes from. Anyway, the trail of death continues as Judah's wife now dies. And time passes. And even though Shelah, the third son, has now grown up, Judah has still not given the third son to Tamar as a wife to continue the family line as the law required. And remember, God's blessing on all nations was to come through this family line. That's why this is important. And this is when Tamar takes matters into her own hands in a way that neither the law or cultural customs would approve of. But the motive is right: to honor her late husband by continuing the family line. And so she hears of Judah's journey and dresses up as a prostitute and sits at the city gate to wait for him. Judah, after the prescribed period of mourning the death of his wife, decides to engage the services of a prostitute. Unbeknownst to him, it just happens to be his disguised daughter-in-law. They haggle about the price for sexual services, and just to make sure he pays up, she demands some personal items: his sash, signet ring, and staff, kind of as collateral. Later on, when Judah sends the agreed-upon price, a young goat, to get his personal items back, no prostitute can be found because Tamar has taken off her disguise and has returned to her father's house as the young widow that she was. And nobody else knows of any prostitute in the area. Judah doesn't want to investigate any further because he's embarrassed he might become the laughingstock as one who frequents prostitutes in the town. So he drops the case, again, for his own safety and well-being. Then in verse 27, you'll note it was not read, but it's an important verse. In verse 27 of chapter 38, Yahweh rewards Tamar for her loyalty and her ingenuity with not one, but twin sons to carry on the family line. Surely this is a double blessing from God. And it would be nice if that were the end of the story. But the ending is a bit messier than that. When Tamar is 3 months pregnant and beginning to show, Judah is told that his daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution and as a result is pregnant. And he is furious and demands that she be burned alive in a public square. A few things to note here about Judah's response. First of all, there is no trial, and Judah seems to make the call without consulting anybody else. Since he had sent Tamar back to her father, she is no longer his property, but her father's. It's not his business. Judah has no jurisdiction in this case. And Judah makes no attempt to locate the impregnator, who was even though that was part of the Levitical law. It takes two to get pregnant. And according to Leviticus chapter 20, verse 12, both are to be executed. His call for public burning goes far beyond the law. That, check out Leviticus 21, verse 9. You never knew Leviticus was such an important book. Leviticus 21, verse 9, public burning was reserved for daughters of priests who had committed adultery. That was not who Tamar was. So who does Judah think he is in asking for this kind of severe punishment? And it all sets us up for the shocking punchline. Tamar's brilliant plan prevented the worst from happening. She holds up Judah's personal items and says, "The one who owns these items is the man who impregnated me." Gotcha. Judah would be indicting himself if he pursued the case. So he relents. Tamar has acted more righteously than me. He realized the law and his mistake. She was doing what he should have done to continue the family line and ensure God's blessing to all peoples. So what can we learn from this story for today? Firstly, we must state the obvious. Not all stories in the Bible are meant to be prescriptive for us. And this story is descriptive of a patriarchal system that is surely oppressive and sinful, to say the least. It does not promote shalom for all people that we believe is central to the gospel. And yet it seems that God accomplishes the divine purposes even in the midst of evil and corrupt systems. And perhaps that is good news for us today, where we continue to struggle with corrupt and evil systems. Secondly, and I think the most important thing we learn, is that this story is ultimately about social justice and not sexual morality. The story may have sexual content, but it's not really about that. The meaning of the story is much deeper. It's about social justice. And this is the challenge for us today. In this regard, Tamar is the undisputed hero of the story. And the narrator of the story knows that her act is a brave one that promotes God's purposes. She has been denied both justice and dignity. There is nothing in the patriarchal system that would give this to her. So she takes it into her own hands, and God blesses her for it. Tamar claims for herself the self-worth and self-determination that the systems denied her. And we continue to be plagued by these same systems. Tamar's act is like other present movements for social, racial, and sexual equality. Tamar claims the self-worth, dignity, and justice that all marginalized people deserve. If the systems do not allow for it, then it must be claimed in subversive and unconventional ways, as she did. Judah recognizes it. God rewards it. Tamar, the feminist foremother, is speaking up. Are we listening? Recall the main point of the Joseph narrative, the preservation of Abraham's family, so that through them blessing might come to all people. That is God's wish. Tamar is part of this same story. In Matthew chapter 1, verse 3, Tamar is listed in the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah. Tamar is speaking up. Her voice echoes forward 1,000 years. This is consistent with the way that Yahweh worked in other situations. Another Canaanite prostitute, Rahab, also becomes part of the people of God. Rahab is the ancestor of Boaz, who marries another foreigner, Ruth, who also uses some subversive tactics to become part of the ancestry of David and ultimately Jesus, the Messiah. Yahweh is a God who speaks up through marginalized people like Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth, all feminist foremothers. Are we listening? Feminism is not only about the amplification of female voices, but also the amplification of other voices of marginalized people. Indigenous, Black, colored, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, non-binary, asexual, unhoused, disabled, differently abled, neurodivergent. Tamar speaks up for all marginalized people. Her descendant, Jesus, whom we follow, did the same. Do you want to live the adventure of Jesus? Listen to Tamar. She speaks up for social justice and equal opportunity for all people. This is what living the adventure of Jesus is all about.